Okay, today, this week, you have two assignments. One is in your research group to have what's called a purpose statement, and the other one is to decide on a research question. So let's go ahead, and this should answer some of your questions about what you need to do to get that purpose statement and to do the research question. And then next week, we'll talk about the IRB and what you need to do for it. So there are three orientations in research, and that's both qualitative and quantitative. And the first one is more quantitative. It's about a positivist perspective. So what it believes is that anything can be studied in an objective, experimental, non-biased way so that you get one true answer. And the truth is usually capitalized in a capital T because there's only one truth for everybody. So if I was to measure an object like a table, I would know the height and the dimensions of it and what the wood or whatever material it was comprised of. I'd be able to dissect it in terms of the material and know all about what that thing is. Interpretivist looks at the fact that you have experiences in your life that are unique. And so all of your lives have stories behind them, and you understand things through your eyes. So there's no real true reality. You have truth, your truth with a small t, because everybody has their own version of the truth. And so you construct your reality through your experiences and social interactions. So to go back to the table example, you may be able to measure and quantify it, but when you're looking at what it actually is, the way it's called, identified, may be different from one culture to another. The use of it may be different. Maybe people sleep on a table, they might eat on a table, they may do homework on a table. It just depends on what your experience is with that table as to how you define what it is and how it's used. And finally, there's a critical orientation, which means that we look at education as an institution designed for cultural reproduction and transformation. And so certain people have the power to be able to tell us what the truth is. And so as a researcher, we look for the power and the privilege that comes with knowing what the truth is through those eyes and what oppression is happening. So when we're critical, we really try to examine power structures. So the question is, which orientation fits with your views? And in the 680 class, what I recommend is that most qualitative researchers don't look at things through positive eyes very much because we're not concerned with measurement, we're concerned with perception. So that leaves it to either interpretivist, constructivist thinking or critical thinking. And generally for beginning class, critical thinking is difficult. And so it may take some more understanding about what qualitative research is. So I really recommend that most of your research be through an interpretivist or constructivist view. But generally speaking, what qualitative researchers try to do is try to understand what the best fit is for answering the question. And in some cases, it may be positivists or constructivists or critical thinking. Different people define qualitative research types in different ways. So according to Merriam, there's 5 basic types, and that's Ethnography, which is a study of cultures, and the researcher is a participant and an observer. They may live with the culture for quite some time, even including up to years, and understand the culture as best as they can. In a case study, you have some sort of boundary. It's usually defined by people and geographic locations and time. And so it can be one person that you're studying in a case study, and it can be up to an entire nation that you're studying. I once had a country that was a case study for one of my students. So, but it's always bounded. And phenomenology is where it's really not bounded. Everybody lives through the same kind of experience, and what you're doing as a researcher is trying to understand that lived experience. So lived experience is a key word. And in phenomenology, an example may be childbirth and how people experience childbirth. So it doesn't really have a geographic location or time that this happens. People have been having babies since the beginning of time. So it could be anybody in the world who's ever had a baby, and you're trying to understand that experience. Grounded theory is where you're not really sure, you don't have much information about whatever topic it is you're trying to understand, and there's no real theory built around it. So you go to different people, you get their ideas, you gain some understanding, and from that you construct a theory. And usually at the end of grounded theory, there's some sort of diagram that shows what your theory framework is like. And then Miriam talks about basic and generic qualitative research, which is really doesn't fit in any of the other four categories. Creswell has it a little bit different. He also has case study, ethnography, grounded theory, and phenomenology. But instead of basic research, he has what's called narrative, and that's where we listen to stories. And sometimes researchers who conduct narrative researches listen in depth for a long period of time to someone's story. It may be a life story, and it may take up to a year or two, in which case a book is usually published about the person. Very different than case study or ethnography. There are other many types of qualitative research. I won't go through them all, but just to tell you a little bit, autoethnography is where somebody actually investigates themselves and their life story. Portraiture is where a researcher goes in and tries to paint in words a picture of what's going on in their research. Participatory action research is where you're trying to accomplish some sort of change. And so that's often done in settings where some change is needed, and it's often done in schools as well. So qualitative researchers are really into understanding. We want to understand. We don't want to describe and measure as much as we want to understand the meaning people make of things. And we want to understand how people construct those meanings, how they make sense of the world. We usually go to the place of interest, out to the field, and we focus on the process and the meaning and the understanding. So we try to get as much as we can, much information from them as we can, in terms of words, in terms of artifacts, objects, and maybe by our observations. And so we put those all in a very descriptive statement. You usually start a qualitative research by being curious about something. And I've talked about curiosity before, but it's really important. It's important to me, and I think it's important to people and especially researchers. We conduct a literature review primarily because we want to understand more about the topic, or maybe it's a topic we've never explored before and we want to understand what it is in depth. It's also a way to get a research project because the only other way is from your own experiences. We all experience things and we want to understand them more. And in that case, we still use a literature review. There are some qualitative researches where literature reviews are not done before we conduct the research because we simply want to understand what that is. So it's a much different kind of research, but you all will conduct a literature review before you do your research. So in qualitative research, the philosophy is really important. So we're going to go into that just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about a purpose statement. So a purpose statement talks about what your research is about. It helps us understand in one paragraph exactly what you're trying to accomplish in this research. So we'll use the language of qualitative research as well. I know I'm not going over these specifically, but you can read, and if you have any questions, please let me know. So tips, make sure and talk about an emerging idea, eliminate some quantitative aspects like direction, something's more than another, or something causes another, or something has a relationship with another. We're trying to get understanding, not comparisons. We're trying to understand who it is that we're talking about and how we're going to study that. And so you'll talk about the kind of method that you're going to use. And so here's the purpose statement that I would like each group to write. This is also in your Canvas for this week. And so please go ahead and print that out and as a group write it so that you actually can fill in the blanks with what you want to do. And then I'll talk to you about it. Kevin and I will talk to you about it and we'll tell you whether or not you're on the right track. And generally you are on the right track, but you may need some refining. Qualitative research is clear and concise, and it identifies the setting and the participants, and it avoids words like factors and things like that that are quantitative. You usually have two forms of questions. In this class, I only want you to have one question, period. But in qualitative research, we have what's called a grand tour question, and that's where we're studying the research in its general form. And then we have some sub-questions that go along with it. And like I say in this class, I'd rather only have one question, period. So we'll talk about that some more. We want to discover, we want to uncover, and we want to understand. And so that's what your question should be like, your research question. Use non-directional wording and expect the research question that you come up with initially not to be your final one. And here's an example of a grand tour question. I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. And have a great week. Bye.